This conversation this morning, I am very, very humbled and very excited to have my predecessor, my immediate predecessor, Dr. Joan Wallace Benjamin. Joni, thank you so much for joining us this morning. What we're doing is that we're trying to have what I call strident conversations with folks who are in the saddle as we get ready to celebrate the 100th anniversary of this affiliate. The affiliate, according to our records, was founded in 1917, but was not incorporated into the National Urban League until 1919. So we are not official until the National recognizes it. So for that 2 years, they were doing a lead-up work.
Okay, lead-up work. Okay.
Lead-up work. And so 1919 to 2019, this affiliate in Boston would turn 100 years. And we thought it would be a real good notion to talk to folks who were in the saddle some in earlier times were executive directors. I think during your term or tenure, they changed it to president and CEO. I'm glad they do it. It gives us a, same pay, but it gives us a prestigious title. but it also comes in with a lot of responsibility and a lot of demands that you don't meet the eye. So what I'd like for you to do is, so we're turning 100 here in Boston. If you were to reflect back during the time that you were in the saddle, what does that mean to you?
Well, if you think about the African American organizations in this community, very few of them are that old. I mean, we may in fact have some churches who've been around for that period of time. But in terms of delivering services, I'm not exactly sure what the NAACP date is, but
they were a year earlier.
Okay, so the Urban League and the NAACP are the two, pretty much the two oldest and most ever present. So I think to strike a centennial at 100 years is a significant accomplishment for an organization in the African American community to have been around so long and been able to endure, if you think about what the last 100 years has looked like, and even the present, I think it's a wonderful and significant milestone.
Well, thank you for being part of that journey. Because you do it with such grace and charm and smile. But then talk about when you were in the saddle as a CEO. I mean, I can bring up a couple of things, but I'll get them out of it. But I want you to talk about, if you think about what we have are like the young black men that are being killed on the streets by police officers. That's no stranger to you when I think about the 10 Commandments and the Rodney King incident. That was pretty much high and prevalent within your tenure, but you also had the scholarship builders doing it. So you had some very significant things that you did right. But talk about the climate of America. Talk about the tensions that you were dealing with while you were in the saddle.
Right. Well, so when I first started, the National Urban League had launched a male responsibility initiative.
Okay.
That included a number of different kinds of interventions. I think our Positive Futures program grew out of that, which was a school-based program for young males who were actually living in single female-headed households, and so it was able to provide some male role model and guidance. Then we had the Young Fathers program, which was another way that the UrbanLeague EasternMass decided to operationalize this male responsibility.
What do you mean, Young Fathers?
So this was a program, actually one of the first, pretty unique for the time that this was in, for the Urban League to support young men who had fathered children, but who were not assuming their rightful responsibility for them. And so the slogan, you can be a father, but you can always have a baby, but you have to be a father. That doesn't make you
create a baby, but you have to be present to be a father.
That's right, to be a father. And so the program was designed to help these young guys kind of get on their feet, get back into school if that was what was needed, get employment if that was what was needed, to sort of figure out what their responsibility was and how they were going to be able to play it. So those were two things that were sort of brand new, and I think at that time the intervention for African American men was pretty unusual. There weren't many organizations specifically dealing with that. We had some of the, as you know, this whole thing is very cyclical. We had a time when crime in the streets was high, gun violence was high, then it goes down a little bit, then it comes up, and now we're still
kind of emerging back
to it. So it's
in the early 80s, late 90s, late 80s, early 90s, you were dealing with that spike of violence here in Boston.
Spike of a lot of drive-by shootings and a lot of gang violence going on. We had the, you know, remember the Charles Stewart case, the guy who threw his wife off the bridge, and then he did something to
the
him.
brother jumped off the, or one of them jumped off the bridge.
He jumped
off the bridge.
But
his
he
brother,
killed his wife, and I guess his wife was
and
pregnant, and you
blamed
know,
it on a black man
exactly
at Mission Hill.
That's right. And so
it's-
we knew that we said,
when you heard it,
when we heard it, we said,
I
the
mean,
brother didn't
I
do
was
that.
coming either from a Celtics game
Yeah.
or something when it popped.
Yeah, it was great.
And it was like, are you kidding me?
No.
It didn't sound
It
like
didn't
something that a
sound
black
right.
person would do.
Well, he did, right, but
You
we
know,
had to then.
we do some crazy stuff, but that wasn't one of them.
But then we had some speak out about that. So there were those flashpoints over the course of at least my early years, and then of course Rodney King and the verdict.
Can we all just get along?
And but the verdict exonerating the policemen, and
Los
as we
Angeles
know,
went up in
violence. Los
flames.
Angeles went up in flames, and violence across the country. And so the 10 Commandments really was an
An
initiative.
outgrowth.
Well, it was interesting because the day the verdict, the day after the verdict, the Urban League, this affiliate, was going to the Eastern Regional Conference.
Okay.
I don't know where it was, in New York State somewhere, but so everyone left, but I stayed behind because.
So that's when the staff, the staff, when you have an Eastern region, that means
Right.
that this is affordability for
Right,
staff
right.
to go.
So they went to
connect
that's
up
right,
with their
connect with
Eastern
their
region
Eastern Regional
affiliates.
College, right? So they left, but this Rodney King thing had just happened. The violence was breaking out, so I stayed behind just to sort of hold the weekend together.
Yeah, be on point.
That's right, be on point. And so Diane Wilkerson and I'll never forget it, met here along with Reverend Eugene Rivers.
Okay, who was on the board at the
Yes,
time?
who was on the board at the time, to say, okay, like, is there anything we can do? Because we really don't want violence to break out here in Boston.
Sounds like during the same time where James Brown came to save Brown after Martin Luther King was assassinated, that Kevin White. So intervention
Yes,
is what I'm talking
this was
about.
intervention. And so we came up with these 10 items as we were talking, and we said, maybe this is a good way, it was actually pretty brilliant, I think, to launch an advocacy movement that was going to move an agenda forward and kind of take advantage of both the business community, the political community, and the community's concern about not having violence break out here in Boston, to get some things to move. And so, for example, one of them was that we wanted an African-American candidate for Suffolk County DA at the time. And at the time, Ralph Martin was teed up to be, and so I look at the panel the other day, and I think we have 3 people of color now vying for the Suffolk County DA. But in those days, that was unheard of, that there would be someone of color in that role, but Ralph Martin was kind of being teed up for that. We never said we wanted Ralph Martin because we were nonpartisan, we couldn't be political in that way, but we said we'd like an African-American person of color to be the Suffolk County DA. And that was one of the 10 demands.
And Ralph was there for 8 years,
Long
I believe.
time, yes, a very long time.
And then he stepped down, and that's when, I think there was Dan Colley followed him, didn't he? No, Ralph was done in 92.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I have the numbers in my office.
But he was, so that happened. There was talk about Bunker Hill Community College merging with Roxbury Community College, kind of under
Was
the
a merger, was it a takeover?
Well, yeah, kind of under the Bunker Hill moniker. And we said one of the 10 Commandments was no, we don't want those two merged. We want Roxbury Community College to stand on its own in the black community. That demandment was met. So
So you achieved many of those
we achieved
commandments.
most of them. I think we may have achieved all of them, actually, yes. And it was the first time I'd ever been called by foundations. I know the Himes Foundation, the Boston Foundation, actually called and said, we want to give you money.
Okay.
That we think this initiative is so powerful and has real, it has some legs. It's some very specific things. It's timed at a perfect time to move it. We had a big community meeting at Madison Park. Over 400 people came, so the community revved up behind it. And so they said, here, let's give you some funding to implement it.
Because
And that's what they
always the
did.
challenge.
And we hired some staff people for whom the 10 Commandment,
So they can
implementation
actually follow through
Follow
and the measure.
That's right.
Did you feel during your tenure, because I know I feel it through mine, that in spite of all the good work that we do you run across people during that time talking about what does the Urban League do? Did you find that?
Well, yeah. Some of them are still around. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm not just having a Darnell moment.
No, but you know what? I think the history of the Urban League does come out of a relatively moderate point of view about activism and change. The organization's always been interracial. You know,
Mhm.
you've always had board people who were white, staff people who were people of color, particularly the CEO was African American and board chairman was white. And it was really, the structure of the organization was supposed to mirror the interracial nature of what the Urban League said was needed, that you had to have everybody kind of around the table.
Around the table.
Yeah,
So
and talking to one
collaborative
another,
partners.
that's right, to get it done. And so I think that structure alone for people, certainly on the more radical end of the left, you know, was like, oh, well, that's a compromise, and oh,
So they
you're
think
too
that
moderate.
their thoughts are that we are in the pocket of these corporate
Yes,
people without
absolutely.
being able to express us.
Absolutely.
And which I refute that.
No, absolutely not true.
Right,
No,
right.
absolutely
No.
not true. But that's where it comes from. So that was, yeah, so in my time there was criticism of that. Well, you know, who is she? And she's not radical enough, and she's not this, she's not that. Look at the Urban League, it's, you know, kind of bourgeois.
Take a ticket and stand in line.
Yeah, right.
'Cause
Yeah,
it's still
really,
there.
really.
Talk about the board chairs that you serve, because I know that you served one of our legendary friends who's no longer with us, and then he was followed by his vice
Oh,
chair,
yeah.
who actually hired me. So
Yeah,
why don't you
Sam
talk about-
Gerson. Well, so when I got here, about a year after being here, you know, part of course, you know, every new executive, the rebuilding of the board and trying to really assess what kind of horses do you really need to pull this wagon if it happened. And we decided with the Gene Mahoney, who was at Reebok at the time,
Mhm.
and Lee F. Jackson,
Mhm.
who was working, I don't think he was in the federal government yet. He was
Right.
killed in the plane
He was
crash.
killed in the plane crash
Right,
with Ron Brown.
Right, but so
Mhm.
he and Gene knew Sam Gerson.
Okay.
And so as we teetered around, who could be our chairman, Sam's name came up, and I remember Gene and I and Lee went out to Wellesley, which is where Sam's office, Filey's basement office was, and talked to him about the Urban League, and asked him point blank, would he be our chairman? And he was intrigued, asked a lot of good questions, said, you know, let me think about it.
Okay.
We came back to the office, and I know Gene and I were in my office saying, okay, well, we gotta nail this guy. We got, you know, we really need Sam Gerson. He would be perfect for this. And we called a florist and ordered a bushel of bananas
Okay.
on the vine, like, you know, a whole big
Okay.
bushel, and told them, put it in a basket with 2 balloons, and please deliver it to,
Why banana?
because we wanted him to be our top banana.
Okay. Glad you asked the question.
Good, you asked the question. So we sent it to the office, says, won't you be our top banana?
Okay.
And, you know, of course, it caused a stir in the company, this big bushel of bananas on a vine coming. And so finally he called me, he said, you know what, I like your style. So yes, I'll do it. And
Oh,
he
he was great.
was the most spectacular person, and just opened his Rolodex, opened his pocketbook, opened all of his contacts to really move the agenda forward. It was a wonderful relationship. He knew that I was here to run this organization, and so did not interfere in any way with that. But on the other hand, he was someone I could call on for any kind of help, any sort of assistance, guidance. I mean, he really was a mentor. When I started here in '89, I was 35 years old. I was a pretty young woman to be a CEO.
You still look good for a young woman.
Thank you. Okay, but you know, but it was. I could use the help and the guidance, and he was perfectly willing and happy to do that. And then the vice chair, a little bit down the road, was George Russell from State Street, who then became the chair.
The chair.
And so Sam was the board chair for 6 of my 11 years.
Well, I
And then
think
George
that
for the remainder.
you talk about those 2 names between Sam Gerson and George Russell. They were probably cut similar cloth in terms of stellar
Yeah.
corporate individuals,
That's
but really had a good understanding of what it took to run a civil rights organization that had products and services.
Right.
And also we want to do a shout out to Jerry Gerson.
Yeah.
She's been there, her and Ed Zucker, they have still been very much a part of our journey.
Well, Ed Zucker
And
was
as well as
instrumental
George.
in this in our buying the building.
Yes.
You know, because he's Chestnut Hill Realty, he
That's
knew
right.
about real estate, he knew the real estate players. Richard Taylor also was on the board at the time and was, Taylor Properties, I think, was, you know, running his
That's right.
company, so he was instrumental. So we really pulled a group of people together to move a lot of significant things forward, and we were renting in this building on the first floor in the beginning from
And on the second
9X,
floor
and
was
then
9X.
became Verizon.
That's right.
And then they were leaving and said, do you want this building? We said, can we buy this building? So we did. I think it was for $325,000.
Okay,
We
and
bought
you
the
should
building and
know,
renovated it.
And you renovated it, and since that time, since I've been in my tenure, we have actually purchased the building and the land, so we're the proud owners of your legacy, just so you know that.
Oh, I thought we owned it, or when I left, we owned it.
No, you had a mortgage.
Oh, I see you brought it, oh, yeah, I know, okay, okay. Oh, I
There's
see.
a difference.
Y'all paid off the big bill, okay, good.
There
is a difference.
Yeah, you did own it.
There is a difference.
But we paid it off.
You know, I thought at the time, and everyone, Sam, the board, thought at the time that the Urban League having a headquarters
Yes.
location that was its own, and that could exist in perpetuity was really important. So, I mean, as an accomplishment, that's one of the proud accomplishments I would say happened while I was here.
It did. I'd say that when you put this in the context of 100 years, you want to talk about what do you think was happening at the national, because you served, I think Vernon Jordan was there during your tenure, or was
No,
it?
John Jacob.
John Jacob. So it was John Jacob. Were you there at all with Hugh Price?
Yes.
Oh, Hugh. So you served under
John
John
Jacob
Jacob.
and Hugh Price.
And
Yeah,
John was
not
a
Mark.
former CEO,
Right.
and then he became the national president, and then he left and went into the corporate sector.
That's right. Yep, to
And
Anheuser-Busch. But even
Anheuser-Busch.
before I joined the Urban League as the CEO, I was an under 30 national trustee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when I was working actually at Head Start in those days, and I was asked to join the National Urban League Board as one of their under 30, because the policy guideline was 15% of the board should be
Okay,
young
under
people.
30.
Under 30. So I
Okay.
was one of those young people. So I knew John Jacob as one, and I was one of the trustees.
Trustees.
He was the national president. I had been on the board here locally with Don Polk.
Okay.
And then when Don decided to leave and went to run the New York Urban League, they called.
New
and
York
said-
City Urban
New York
League?
City Urban League.
Okay.
Said, would you consider taking this job? Well, at the time, I had just had a new baby, and I said, I just had a baby, and I have to go back to the Boys and Girls Clubs to finish up some things since I took my maternity leave. And then that's when Bill Brown was the interim for that period between Don Polk and me. He was here for about a year.
Okay.
And then a year later, they called again and said, okay, will you come do it? And so by that time, my baby was the ripe old age of 1. So I said, sure. And that's when I started.
Well, Bill Brown, I mean, we both know, I knew Bill Brown when I worked in Hartford.
Because he was, yeah.
He's from Hartford. And he actually was the CEO who sat me down when I was in college to tell me, I told him I wanted to help my community. And Bill Brown gave me an hour conversation and schooled me. I went back to college and changed my major, the whole 9 yards. And he says, if you want to help, I was a sociology major.
Okay.
I thought it was ideally suited.
Yeah, I feel
But he told me to go back and get an accounting degree, a business degree, and once I do that, then I can come back and help my people. And so that's what I ended up doing, and he was so right.
He was so right.
And so when he passed away, I had the opportunity to celebrate his daughter and them with his homegoing, but he was a gentleman.
Right, so then I came September 1989, I remember,
Okay.
started. And we were down the stairs on the first floor, there were 6 people on the staff.
Wow.
I was actually among the youngest on the staff.
On the staff?
At the time. And so we went from 6 people to over 35 people in the time I was here. Grew the budget from $250,000 the day I started to $4.5 million the day I left.
Wow.
So it was.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was.
That's
It was
impressive.
a lot of it was the drinking water from a fire hose, but it was fun.
Well, it is. Dr. Joan Wallace Benjamin is here talking about her tenure as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. As we celebrate the centennial, we talked about talk about the scholarship builders.
Right, so the Scholarship Builder program was, I think came out of a national initiative. It wasn't something that we started here locally, something that started nationally, but we were one of the affiliates that was selected to participate. And they took, Merrill Lynch was the company
Excuse me.
that said they took, I think it was 23 young people in kindergarten, like little bitties, or they took a 2nd grade class, maybe 1st or 2nd grade class, I don't exactly remember, and said, if these kids get through college, we will pay for their college education all the way up through.
Oh, wait, so they follow these kids.
They followed the
from
kids.
whatever grade, whether it's kindergarten,
Yeah.
1st or 2nd
Yeah,
grade.
they all started really little,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
right.
and then they went through college, 4
Right.
years of college.
And then I'm not really, you need to tell me, because by the time I left, most of the kids had not reached college yet. They must have been maybe high school
They
kids,
followed
or
up.
they were freshmen, they were early college years. So I don't really know what happened to the.
Many of them did succeed
Okay.
and went on to college and could succeed, and some of them kind of fell off. And I think that was what the whole, I wouldn't call it experiment, I think that's what the initiative was, is that if we give these young people resources in order to acquire higher academic, then their lives and trajectory
Right.
would be changed.
Right.
And we need to have more programs like that, because that's really what the issue is today.
Right. I mean, they took so the good news, bad news, they took I remember a second grade class, the entire second grade class, and said, we will follow these groups of kids through this time. Now, the Boston Public Schools with the student assignments, I mean, kids after that initial second grade year could be like splintered all over the place. So I think, at least from the Urban League's point of view, it was kind of hard to keep track of everybody, because we had everybody in one class, and then the process splintered everything out. Yeah. So I don't know what they would say. Hindsight being 2020, whether that would have been handled differently. I think if you were going to have the natural splintering off into all directions anyway, I think a better way might have been to develop a process of selecting 23 kids through some process who knew.
School that goes from
Right.
K through 8
Right.
would probably be an
Yeah.
ideal setting, and then they all go
Right.
to the same high school.
High school, yeah.
As
right.
opposed to, because
Right.
I mean, the things that I know, the folks change phone numbers
Yeah,
like
it's
they
just
change
crazy.
socks.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So it was very difficult to keep track. And, there could have been a strength, I think, in having a cohort stay together and move together. But the realities of the Boston Public Schools or school systems generally just didn't, and neighborhood mobility, it just didn't make that possible. So I'm glad to hear, certainly, that some of the kids were able to take advantage of the brass ring at the end of the game.
They did, and there was an article that was done. I think that when we think about the economic disparities of today, were they as prevalent as they are today as they were during your tenure in terms of the African American community trying to find its sea legs, so to speak, in this economy or in this society?
Yes.
Okay. Sure. So not much has changed.
Well,
it has changed, but it's still daunting.
it's still daunting, right? And I mean, if you think about the recent statistics, Darrell Settles and his initiative about looking at, what is the net worth of an African American family in Boston compared to its white cohort.
$8 for the black family, $261,000 for the average white family.
It's crazy. So those numbers just don't even make any sense.
It's scary.
It's scary. They don't even make any sense, really, right? It's so off tilter. So yeah, but we had some of the same concerns, and we the slogan, we put people to work.
That's what was born out of that.
Yeah, it was born out of that this affiliate decided to attack some of those economic development issues through employment and training. And remember, we were very much involved in the transition of women from welfare to work.
Okay.
And it's funny because I remember being on a panel with Charlie Baker, our governor now, who was the head of EOHHS, I think, at the time.
Right, executive officer
of Health and Human Services, right, fighting with him about welfare to work, because we believed that women transitioning from welfare to work, that education, employment, and training ought to be part of that transition.
That's correct.
That you couldn't just pluck a woman off welfare and pluck her into a low-wage job
and
with no training and expect it to work. And but no, his feeling was no, employment and training was not going to be counted as work. We wanted it to be counted as work. Right. In the same way that work was counted as work. And so it's funny, you go fast forward, and Charlie and I have been known each other a long time, been colleagues, and frequently on the opposite side of at least the policy debate about things. But
so we find ourselves doing this work on the health, educational front, economic front, just the list goes on and on. So how did you maintain sanity and balance between work life, family life, and balance? Talk Talk
Yeah.
about that during your time.
I actually have no idea. So I've just recently retired.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So it was a 37-year total career, 37 years. And I was here 11 and was at the Home for the Wanderers where I left for 15. And of the 37 years, 27 of which I was a CEO.
Okay.
So as I said, when I first got here, my youngest child was 1, who's now 30. And my oldest child was 4 and a half, who's now 34.
Okay. And they're doing both well.
And they're both doing spectacularly well. They're wonderful young guys. And, and I was a woman, and my husband, I was happily married, been married for 42 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So my husband and I had
Ben,
two little boys. My guy Ben. So we had these 2 little boys, and I was running this affiliate, and Ben was running the Community Development Finance Corporation. CDFC.
Okay.
So here we were, a relatively young couple. I was 35 when I got here. Young couple sort of juggling 2 little kids and daycare and jobs. And so I think back now on that time, and I actually don't know how I quite did it. I think I depended on a lot of people, a lot of babysitters. I must have put some of these kids through college with the babysitting fees that I was handing out. But the interesting thing was Sam Gerson was very sensitive to that. He was very sensitive to the fact that he had an executive of a really, a burgeoning organization that had a lot of responsibility and not had children. And so he allowed babysitting and the money that I was shelling a lot of cash out of my income to be out 3 nights a week, for example. There was a lot of money in those. So he said, no, we'll make that an expense. So you could submit receipts if it goes over a certain amount. I forget what it was. We'd have to have some kind of documentation, whatever. But so I got help being able to do my job, and he was sensitive to my being a female executive. But even with that, Ben and I were juggling every single Sunday night, and who's picking up the kids, who's dropping off, who's doing this. It was a major feat.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
You can imagine that still today that is a challenge for working women. Transportation and child care are still very much prevalent. And you should be pleased to know that workforce development is still the mantra of this affiliate.
Well, I've seen all the computer rooms here.
I know, the technology in terms of the digital marketing, the coding, which we call Massembo here, CLIck, which is our computer learning and internet knowledge. So we try to make sure that everyone who comes through these doors, whether you're a mature worker or whether you're a young worker or coming back into the workforce, that technology is part of your portfolio that you offer to a prospective employer. So we have never lost sight of that.
Good. Yeah, well, I remember we opened the Technology Center, this room right over here, with a huge grant from Verizon.
That's right.
So
we still have the plaque on the wall.
Yeah,
I think Wayne Budd was
involved with
Was
that.
he?
That's right. And Ivan Seidenberg was the head of the national Verizon. Nationally, he was the CEO. And so they gave us this money, and we opened up the skills training program. And it was, this is early. This must be early 90s, mid-90s, when, every household did not have a computer in it for sure.
That's right.
And people didn't have iPhones. None of that technology was really.
Some of us have Android, some of us still
you don't have iPhone, excuse me. Mobile phone, period. I remember my first mobile phone was this big thing. It looked like a big walkie-talkie, and it hooked into a couplet in my car. It was a little antiquated. But so that was, we really didn't, the technology was not nearly as accessible as advanced. So having this here, and we had classes, and people came and actually learned how to turn on a computer and what to do and how to use it was really invaluable. But prior to the center opening, though, our kind of specialty in employment training here was around soft skills.
Soft skills.
Because we first found that so many young African American men and women and other men and women of color were not unsuccessful on the job because they couldn't do the work. Many of them were unsuccessful because they didn't have the soft skills of attendance, timeliness, demeanor, attire, understanding of the workplace,
how to survive around the water bubble.
That's right. And how to work with colleagues, and even more importantly, how to work with superiors. And so we focused on using the sort of the Efficacy Institute theory of development, sort of use that as a way to get people sort of mentally ready to understand what working in a successful way was meant.
It's
how
a
to do it.
challenge because the funding challenges and the ebb and the flow
Yeah.
of what they supported one day
That's
versus what
right.
they support
That's
the
right.
next day. So you have to remain
Yeah.
adaptable
Yeah, absolutely.
or adjust to the
Absolutely
circumstances.
right. I
Would
mean,
you not?
nobody wanted to fund soft skills.
No,
You know,
they still don't.
They still don't. Right. So they want to fund hard skills. Like there's a computer there. You're going to teach somebody specifically how to use it. That's
But-
here. But what we found was even when you taught the technology skills, if you did not do the soft skill stuff and do it well,
You won't be successful.
the retention just wasn't there. People didn't stay on the job.
Turnover.
And the turnover, the reputation of our community as having young men and women who were capable of doing a good job sort of downtown, if that's where they were going, you know, got affected by that. So we stuck with it. We cobbled together funding, but we stuck with some of the soft skill stuff just because without it, it wasn't working. So.
Yeah, with your role in the AOE, your participation with your colleagues
Yeah.
around the country, Dr. Joan Wallace Benjamin, how would you describe that as you look at it through the lens of the 100 years?
Well, it's interesting. So in 1989, when I started, there were only 7 women out of
As CEOs?
as CEOs out of the 115 affiliates.
That's right.
By the time I left, it was almost close to, or maybe a little over 50%.
Yes, it's more now.
So the whole of the 115 now, it's not 115 affiliates
No,
yet. So that
no.
number is smaller. But at that time, these were affiliates that had
So
run
what you're
them
saying is
for
that
years and years
men were the predominant
absolutely.
selection
for the
president and
executive.
CEO.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And women now have really become the majority
Right.
CEO
That's right.
and board chair.
That's right. So there were 7 of us, and
So
the
did
rule.
y'all have a little click?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, the women had to stick together. Stick together. The rule was, as a new executive, you weren't allowed to speak
Oh, no.
in the AO.
In your first year or
Well,
two?
clearly that didn't work because I had a lot
Okay.
to say about those things. So they had a rule, but I didn't quite follow the rule.
Surprise,
Yeah,
surprise,
But
surprise.
if you were asked some of the old timers, money they're not still there, but back then they said that women joining the movement civilized the movement. I mean, they gave credit to the fact that the 7 of us, although very small, being there
Made a difference.
Made a difference, made the conversation, and they may have had some of their own chauvinist beliefs. Don't get me wrong. I don't think everybody was, had a liberated mind.
We're not gonna talk about names, but I know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
right. That's right. So I'm not going to say that, but the experience was not a bad one. The experience was very pleasant, and the men in the movement sort of swung up around the 7 of us, supported us. There were several execs, John Mack, the late John Mack.
Yeah, I was at his home.
Yeah, so sad that, I could call him, and T. Willard Fair, you could call him if you
Compton
needed
and
something, Compton in Chicago, Jim Buford in St. Louis.
St.
So there were
Louis.
just a lot of good guys
They really are.
that
Those
were
are good
willing
guys.
to help you sort of navigate the whole thing. But it was an interesting time to be a female in a really male-dominated organization.
Space. Well, I think the key is that if you take a look at what you are projecting, what you would project as we get ready to go into the next 100 years, how would you articulate what would be our challenges or opportunities? And I say that because people say, is the Urban League, the NAACP, civil rights organization, are they still relevant?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. The answer to that is yes, they are still relevant.
Okay.
I do think, and part of what changed over my 11 years and even since is not only, for example, did the CEO Corps become more and more female, but it also became more and more diverse in terms of the backgrounds of the people, men and women, who took the job.
Mm-hmm.
And the recognition, in '89, the recognition that this was a business. Now, its product was service, but you had to run this like a business. You had to run it with good personnel policies and procedures. You had to run it where you weren't spending more than you were earning. You had to.
There's some accountability.
And you had to have an infrastructure to support the work. So I think that aspect is, you look into the future, and the appreciation that affiliates, if they're going to stay alive, fulfilling the civil rights mission, which is clearly still a mission. I mean, look at our country today. I mean, it's
Well,
clearly needed.
we're racially divided
Yeah, it's
as
just,
a nation.
it's just
and
almost feels like going,
We're
gone.
retrenching.
We've retrenched, yeah. So the mission and the need for the services and the positioning of the Urban League in our society is definitely needed.
In terms of advocacy
And
role.
advocacy and the public policy role.
Okay.
And affiliates just need to make sure, though, that they have that undergirded foundation
Of
of resources and good management and good leadership to keep affiliates afloat.
It's a challenge right now
Yeah,
across
sure.
the country.
If you're not afloat, you can't promote the struggle and figure out how to solve the problem. So those are the two.
One of the ways that we describe it in our kind of language, we tell participants who come through the door, whether they're customers, participants, or trainees, that we want you to become self-sufficient. Whatever. So tell us what barriers are that are in your life.
Right.
And then what we do is we wrap our services around them to help them navigate
Knock
those
the barriers
barriers.
down, that's right.
But we never ever stop to think, now what do you need to do as an agency to become self-sufficient? So we're having the same conversation, but we're having it internally. That's the difference that we would offer for the next 100 years.
And so the Urban League's not the only organization. A lot of organizations are trying to figure out, are there aspects of the services they provide, delivery that they do, that could be offered for a fee? Can they have a
fee for service.
A fee for service sort of
Model.
side organization to it. So we're 501c3, but can you have, I don't know, it's 501, whatever, some other structure that allows you to
We're on it.
Yeah,
We're on
to
it.
earn income
That's exactly
at
right.
the same time, and then allow the earned income to pay for the
To
service
subsidize
delivery.
or support
That's right, the
the
service
the 501. So
Right.
we're exactly right there, but you'll hear more about that later.
Good.
So if we were to think about, as you make the prognosis for the future, what would be the legacy that you think after 100 years that the Urban League can really speak to in terms of what do we represent from our culture, from our attitude, from our resolve? What is it that is about the Urban League that makes us distinctively different when you think about that?
Well, so you think about 1910, when National opened in New York City. The purpose of the organization came into being to help Southern migrants
That's right.
who had been slaves
Mhm.
navigate their way out of the South and away from being farmers, which
The
most
great-
of,
the
most
great
of-
black-
yeah,
the
the
great black
migration.
migration.
I mean the warmth of other suns. I don't know, by Isabel Wilkerson. I don't know if you've read that book, but it talks about that many-year travel. My grandparents were part of that migration from North Carolina into New York to live in Harlem, and it was trying to help African Americans who had been farmers learn how to live in the industrial north.
In urban areas.
In urban areas. And so that's really not, the need for the skills to do that are not gone. You still need to, you're now not coming off the farm or the plantation, but you are trying to raise families, trying to work in the cities of America. That the Urban League's urban agenda is very much there and very much needed and present. So I think that over 100 years, while how we got to where we are was different, because we were just recently coming out of slavery, it's not the need is still there, and some of the services are still required.
We call it, how do we break the cycle of poverty? And whether they were coming off of the farm or whether they're coming out of low economic, low education opportunities, that's what our job is and still remains. So going forward, because in spite of all of the opportunities that seem to present itself to our society, there's some of us are still trapped.
Still trapped, and still not, still just can't get our head up above that water, right?
100 years later, Dr. Joan Wallace Benjamin, Darnell Williams, and I have to say that I've joined the elite circle because now I'm considered Dr. D.
Oh, good. Okay,
So,
Dr. D.
Dr. D and Dr. J is in the house,
Good.
and we're celebrating 100th anniversary for the centennial of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts.
Wonderful.
Joni, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing with us your insights of your 11 years. You were the 18th CEO of this affiliate. I am the 20th, and you and I are the two longest serving. that you should know
Well, there
that.
you go. And
All
we're
right.
both still standing.
That's right.
Yeah, it was a wonderful
It's
11
better to be
years.
seen.
Yeah, that's right. It absolutely is.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much, Darnell.
Thank you, my
I
sister.
appreciate it.
Bless you.